Jimin finally speaks after weeks. Jungkook is cheerful and can't hold back tears. The microphone slipped from Jimin's fingers and struck the stage with a hollow crack, and in that split second, Jungkook's smile broke open into tears. The lights were too bright, the air too thin, and the crowd, thousands of breathing, waiting bodies, fell into a stunned silence as Jimin stood frozen, his chest rising too fast, eyes glassy with something far heavier than stage fright. Jungkook was beside him, hand half-reached as if afraid that touching him might make him disappear again. "I'm sorry," Jimin whispered, not into the mic but into the space between his own ribs. The words shouldn't have mattered. They were small, fragile things. But after weeks of silence, weeks of cancelled appearances, unanswered questions, and carefully worded statements, they landed like thunder. Jungkook laughed then, a soft, broken sound that surprised even himself. Tears streamed freely down his cheeks as he bowed his head, shoulders shaking, joy and relief tangling so tightly they hurt. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, always afraid it would never come. The memory of those weeks pressed in on him now, vivid as bruises. Jimin sitting on the studio floor at 3 a.m, back against the wall, knees drawn to his chest, staring at nothing. Jimin flinching at applause. Jimin refusing mirrors. Silence had become his armor and his prison. Jimin lifted his head slowly. The stage smelled of warm metal and ozone from the lights, sweat and perfume from the crowd. His hands trembled, a habit he hated because it betrayed him. He clasped them together, nails digging into skin, grounding himself in pain because pain was familiar. "I know you've been waiting," he said, voice barely steady. "I know I disappeared." A murmur rippled through the audience, but Jimin didn't look at them. He looked only at Jungkook. Jungkook nodded, lips pressed together, eyes shining. He had always been expressive, too expressive, critics said, but he had learned to hide fear behind brightness, to be cheerful because someone had to be. For weeks, he had smiled through interviews and rehearsals, laughing a second too late, sleeping a little less each night. His greatest fear wasn't that the world would turn on them. It was that Jimin would never come back to himself. "You didn't disappear," Jungkook said softly, forgetting the microphones, the rules. "You were fighting." The word fighting loosened something inside Jimin. His shoulders sagged, breath shuddering. He had been fighting himself, memories, expectations, the crushing weight of being seen and misunderstood all at once. He had been afraid that speaking would make everything real. "When I stopped talking," Jimin continued, "it wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I cared too much. Every word felt like it could break someone or me." His mind flashed with images he never shared. Anonymous messages that cut deep, the endless replay of mistakes magnified beyond reason, the night he stared at his phone, thumb hovering, choosing silence over a scream. He had learned early that people loved the image of him more than the messy truth underneath. Silence had seemed safer. Jungkook stepped closer, close enough that their shoulders brushed. The simple contact sent a pulse of warmth through Jimin's chest. Jungkook had always grounded him with small things, shared snacks, off-key singing, terrible jokes at the worst times. Even now, Jungkook's eyes crinkled with that familiar tenderness. "I was scared," Jungkook admitted, voice breaking at last. "But I believed you'd talk when you were ready." The crowd exhaled as one. Some cried openly. Others watched with hands over their mouths, witnessing not a performance, but a fracture healing in real time. Jimin reached for the microphone again, this time holding it firmly. His breathing slowed. He spoke not as an idol, but as a man exhausted from carrying too much alone. "I'm still scared," he said, "but I'm here, and I'm talking now because I don't want silence to decide my story." Jungkook laughed again, brighter this time, wiping his face with the heel of his hand like he always did when overwhelmed. "See," he said, half to Jimin, half to the universe. "You're stronger than you think." The words lodged deep. Jimin didn't argue. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel the urge to disappear. The music swelled gently behind them, a cue missed and then reclaimed. The stage lights softened from harsh white to warm gold, bathing them in something that felt like forgiveness. Jimin glanced out at the audience at last. Faces blurred together, but the energy was unmistakable, supportive, aching, alive. He bowed deeply, sincerely. Thank you for waiting. When he straightened, Jungkook pulled him into a brief, fierce hug. Cameras flashed, but neither cared. Jungkook's shoulders still shook, but his smile was wide and unguarded now, the kind that came from surviving something together. Backstage later, the quiet felt different, not heavy, but calm. Jimin sat on a worn couch, fingers wrapped around a paper cup of tea, steam fogging his vision. Jungkook dropped beside him, close as always. You okay? Jungkook asked. Jimin nodded slowly, not fixed, but breathing. Jungkook grinned. That's a start. Jimin watched the steam rise and disappear, thinking about how silence had once felt endless. Now, words waited patiently, no longer enemies. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, he wasn't walking it alone. And that, more than applause or lights or headlines, was what finally steadied his heart. The door slammed so hard the walls seemed to recoil, and Jungkook's laughter died in his throat. Who leaked it? The manager demanded, voice sharp enough to cut glass. Jimin stood near the window, city lights slicing across his face, phone clenched so tightly his knuckles burned. The screen still glowed with headlines multiplying faster than he could read them. Half-truths, wild theories, words twisted into weapons. I didn't say that, Jimin said quietly. You didn't have to, the manager snapped. Silence invites interpretation. Speaking invites war. Jungkook stepped forward, heat flaring behind his eyes. Don't talk to him like that. The room smelled of cold coffee and tension. Somewhere outside, sirens wailed, distant but relentless. Jimin felt his pulse in his ears, each beat a reminder that the world hadn't softened just because he'd finally spoken. They're saying you accuse the industry, the manager continued, packing. They're saying you're unstable. They're digging up everything, old clips, private moments. Jimin laughed once, brittle. They've been calling me unstable for years. This isn't new. But this time, the manager said, stopping, you confirmed their narrative by breaking the silence. Jungkook turned to Jimin, voice low. Is that what you think you did? Jimin met his gaze. For a moment, the noise faded. I think I told the truth, and the truth scares people who benefit from quiet idols. The manager exhaled sharply. Truth doesn't pay damages. Jungkook scoffed. Neither does lying until someone breaks. The argument spiraled, voices overlapping, each word adding fuel. Contracts were mentioned. Sponsors. Risks. Jimin listened, detached, the way he used to during panic attacks, anchored to breath, to the feel of the cool glass against his palm. Then his phone buzzed again. A message this time, not a headline. Unknown number. You should have stayed quiet. His stomach dropped. Jungkook saw the color drain from his face. What is it? Jimin handed him the phone. Jungkook read, jaw tightening. That's a threat. It's a warning, the manager corrected, and proof that this has gone too far. Jimin's voice shook despite himself. So what now? I disappear again. Apologize for existing too loudly. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Jungkook broke it. No. Everyone turned. No more hiding, Jungkook said, voice fierce. If they want a story, we control it together. The manager stared at him. You're emotional. This isn't about friendship. Jungkook laughed humorlessly. Everything is about that. That's what you forget. Jimin felt something inside him crack open. Not pain this time, but resolve. Fear still coiled in his chest, but it no longer ruled him. I won't retract my words, Jimin said, but I'll clarify them on my terms. The manager studied him, calculating. You realize this could burn bridges. Jimin nodded. Some bridges deserve to burn. Later, alone in the dressing room, the quiet hummed differently, charged, electric. Jungkook sat across from Jimin, elbows on knees, eyes intense. You scared? Jungkook asked. Yes, Jimin answered immediately. Then, after a beat, but I'm more scared of going silent again. Jungkook smiled softly, eyes wet. Good, because I can't do those weeks again. Watching you disappear, it nearly broke me. Jimin swallowed hard. I didn't know. I didn't tell you, Jungkook said. I thought being cheerful would make it easier for you to come back. Jimin crossed the space between them and pulled Jungkook into a tight embrace. Jungkook stiffened for half a second, then melted, clutching him like an anchor. I'm here, Jimin whispered, even if it gets ugly. Outside, the noise of the world pressed closer, hungry and relentless. Inside, two hearts steadied each other, bracing for impact, not as idols, not as symbols, but as people finally refusing to be quiet. The studio lights were merciless, white and unforgiving, reflecting off the polished floor like an interrogation room disguised as a talk show. Jimin sat perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, posture calm enough to look rehearsed. Jungkook stood just behind the camera line, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight it ached. He hated this distance, the rule that said support had to be invisible. The host leaned forward, smile sharp. People are calling this the most controversial statement of your career, she said. Some say you were brave, others say you were irresponsible. What do you say to those who think you should have stayed silent? The question landed exactly where it was meant to hurt. Jimin inhaled slowly. He could hear his own heartbeat, feel the fabric of his sleeve against his skin. Weeks ago, this would have sent him spiraling. Now, the fear was still there, but it no longer owned him. I say silence almost destroyed me, Jimin replied. The room shifted, cameras adjusted. Somewhere, a producer sucked in a breath. The host blinked, clearly not expecting that. Destroyed you how? Jimin glanced briefly toward Jungkook. Their eyes met. Jungkook gave the smallest nod, a silent permission. I was praised for being perfect, Jimin said. Smiling, agreeable, quiet. And when I couldn't keep that up anymore, I thought the problem was me. The host tried to interrupt. But surely. No, Jimin said, not raising his voice but stopping her cold. Let me finish. A murmur rippled through the crew. For weeks, I didn't speak because I was afraid that if I did, I'd be labeled difficult, unstable, ungrateful, he continued. And when people say I should have stayed silent, what they're really saying is that my pain was more convenient when it was invisible. Behind the cameras, Jungkook's eyes burned. Pride and anger tangled in his chest. He had watched Jimin shrink himself for years, sanding down every sharp edge until there was almost nothing left. The host recovered quickly. Some critics argue you're encouraging others to rebel against the system that built you. Jimin's lips curved into a sad smile. The system didn't build me, people did. And some of them are sitting in rooms like this, deciding which truths are acceptable. That was the moment the internet would explode. Jungkook could already feel it. After the show, chaos erupted exactly as predicted. Phones buzzed nonstop. Staff whispered in corners. Someone shouted that a sponsor was reconsidering. Another voice said the clip was trending worldwide. In the hallway, the manager confronted them again, face pale with fury. Do you have any idea what you just did? Yes, Jimin answered calmly. I told the truth again. This isn't courage, it's provocation, the manager hissed. You're turning this into a spectacle. Jungkook stepped forward, unable to stay silent any longer. It was already a spectacle. You just preferred it when he was the one bleeding quietly. The manager's eyes snapped to him. You're crossing a line. Jungkook laughed, sharp and humorless. Funny, you never said that to the people crossing lines into his life. Silence fell, thick and volatile. Jimin placed a hand on Jungkook's arm, not to stop him, but to steady them both. I know this is uncomfortable, Jimin said to the manager, but discomfort isn't the same as danger. The manager looked at him, really looked as if seeing someone new. You've changed. Jimin nodded. I had to, or I wouldn't be here. Later that night, back in the quiet of the dorm, the noise of the world finally muted. Rain tapped against the windows, soft and relentless. Jungkook sat on the floor, back against the couch, scrolling through messages he didn't answer. They're tearing you apart online, Jungkook muttered, and praising you, sometimes in the same sentence. Jimin sat beside him, knees drawn up. Let them. Jungkook turned, eyes red. How are you so calm? I'm not, Jimin admitted. I'm just done letting fear decide everything. Jungkook swallowed hard. I was so angry today. I wanted to grab the mic and scream at them. Jimin smiled faintly. You already did, just without a mic. Jungkook laughed, then abruptly covered his face, shoulders shaking. I'm happy, he said through tears, and furious and terrified all at once. Jimin leaned over and rested his forehead against Jungkook's. Me too. They stayed like that for a long time, breathing in sync, the rain filling the silence that no longer felt threatening. Outside, the world argued, judged, speculated. Inside, something fragile but powerful had taken root, a truth spoken aloud, and a bond strong enough to survive the noise. For the first time in weeks, Jungkook smiled without forcing it. And Jimin, finally, didn't feel the urge to disappear. The press conference was never supposed to happen. Jimin learned that only 10 minutes before walking into the room when the manager stopped in front of him, eyes darting, voice low and urgent. Change of plan. Emergency damage control. You'll answer a few questions, then we're done. Jungkook's head snapped up. He didn't agree to this. You don't have to agree when the building's already on fire, the manager replied. Jimin studied the closed doors ahead of them. On the other side waited reporters packed shoulder to shoulder, cameras primed like loaded weapons. He could hear the muffled roar of voices, the hunger in it. I'll do it, Jimin said suddenly. Both of them turned to him. Jungkook stared. Jimin. I'll do it, Jimin repeated, calmer now, but not like this. The manager frowned. What does that mean? It means, Jimin said, meeting his gaze without flinching, you don't interrupt me, you don't cut me off, and you don't put words in my mouth. The manager hesitated, then nodded once. 5 minutes. Inside, the air was thick with heat and anticipation. Flashes exploded the moment Jimin stepped up to the podium. Jungkook stayed just off to the side, visible enough to be noticed, close enough to matter. A reporter didn't wait. Jimin, are you accusing your company of silencing you? Another voice cut in. Are you having mental health issues? A third, louder. Is this about internal conflict within the group? The noise surged, overlapping, aggressive. Jimin raised his hand. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't shout. He simply lifted his hand and waited. Slowly, impossibly, the room quieted. No, Jimin said. I'm not accusing anyone of a conspiracy, and no, this isn't about internal conflict. If anything, this is about survival. Cameras zoomed in. For a long time, he continued, I thought strength meant endurance, taking everything without reacting, smiling no matter what it cost. A reporter scoffed. That's the job. Jimin's eyes snapped to him. That's the myth. A ripple moved through the room. I broke my silence because I realized something, Jimin said. If I kept enduring quietly, I wouldn't survive long enough to be grateful for any of it. Someone asked sharply, so you admit you're not well? Jimin didn't dodge it. I admit I'm human. That landed harder than any denial could have. Jungkook felt his chest tighten. He watched Jimin's hands, steady now, no tremor, and remembered nights when those same hands shook so badly he could barely hold a cup. Another reporter leaned forward. Are you saying fans are part of the problem? Jimin's jaw tightened. I'm saying dehumanization comes from everywhere. From hate, from pressure, from love that doesn't allow room to breathe. A murmur, controversial, dangerous. The manager shifted uneasily. Jungkook stepped forward without thinking. Stop twisting his words. All heads turned. Jungkook hadn't been invited to speak. He knew that. He didn't care. He's not blaming fans, Jungkook said, voice sharp with emotion. He's asking to be seen as a person, not a product. A reporter raised an eyebrow. And you're speaking for him now. Jungkook shook his head. No, I'm standing with him. Jimin looked at Jungkook, surprise flickering, then gratitude so raw it hurt. I don't need anyone to speak for me, Jimin said softly, but I won't apologize for accepting support. The room buzzed. The host from the earlier show whispered urgently to a producer. Phones lit up across the room as clips were already being shared. One final question rang out, cutting through the noise. Do you regret speaking up? Jimin paused. For a second, the weight of everything pressed down again. The threats, the headlines, the risk of losing what he'd built. Then he thought of Jungkook crying and laughing at the same time on stage, of the dorm quiet that no longer suffocated him, of breathing. No, Jimin said. I regret staying silent as long as I did. When it was over, when the doors finally closed and the noise dulled to a distant echo, Jungkook let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That was insane, he said, half laughing. You just rewrote the rules. Jimin leaned against the wall, exhaustion crashing over him now that the adrenaline was gone. I'm terrified. Jungkook smiled, eyes wet again. Me too, but I've never been prouder. Jimin laughed quietly, then surprised them both by crying, silent tears, relief more than pain. Jungkook pulled him into a tight hug without hesitation, ignoring the staff, the cameras still lingering. For the first time, the chaos didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a reckoning already survived. The silence after the press conference was more terrifying than the noise before it. Jimin felt at the moment the elevator doors closed, sealing him and Jungkook inside a narrow box of mirrored walls and artificial light. The hum of the cables sounded too loud. His reflection stared back at him from every angle, calm face, tired eyes, a man who had just said things he could never take back. Jungkook broke first. You scared the hell out of me. Jimin let out a shaky breath. I scared myself. Jungkook laughed, sharp and breathless. You looked right at them. You didn't flinch. Do you know how many people would have folded under that? Jimin closed his eyes. I almost did. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open to an empty underground parking level, echoing and dim. Their footsteps sounded too loud as they walked. Jungkook's phone buzzed again. He didn't check it. They're probably furious, he said anyway. Sponsors, executives, everyone who likes quiet obedience. Let them be furious, Jimin replied, though his voice wavered. I'm done begging for permission to exist. They reached the car. Jungkook leaned against it instead of opening the door, studying Jimin carefully. Say it honestly. Are you okay? Jimin hesitated, the truth pressed at his throat. I'm holding together, he said, but I don't know what happens next. Jungkook nodded slowly. Neither do I, and that scares me, he swallowed. But losing you scares me more. The words hit harder than any headline. Jimin's chest tightened. I didn't realize how close I was, he admitted. To disappearing, not physically, just fatting. Jungkook's voice dropped. I did. Jimin looked up sharply. I saw it, Jungkook continued. The way you stopped arguing, stopped laughing the same way. You kept saying you were fine, and I kept pretending to believe you because I didn't know how to help. Guilt flashed across Jimin's face. I never wanted you to carry that. I carried it anyway, Jungkook said, heat creeping into his tone. Because that's what we do, or at least what we're told to do. The air between them felt charged, heavy with everything unsaid over the years. Back at the dorm, the tension followed them inside. The living room lights were off, the space lit only by the city glow bleeding through the windows. Jimin dropped onto the couch, exhaustion finally claiming him. Jungkook paced. They're already spinning it, Jungkook said, scrolling at last. Some are calling you a hero, others are calling you ungrateful. One article says you're destabilizing the group. Jimin's jaw clenched. That's the one that hurts the most. Jungkook stopped packing. Then let me say something. Jimin looked up. Say what? The truth, Jungkook replied. My truth. A spike of fear shot through Jimin. They'll come for you too. They already do, Jungkook said quietly. I just smile better. Jimin stood abruptly. No, I won't let you get dragged into this because of me. Jungkook's eyes flashed. Dragged? Jimin, this isn't a burden I'm picking up. This is a line I'm choosing to cross. Silence fell, thick and electric. You don't get to decide this alone anymore, Jungkook continued, voice shaking with restrained emotion. Not after everything. Jimin's breath hitched. What if it ruins everything we've built? Jungkook stepped closer. What if staying silent ruins you? The words sliced clean and precise. Jimin looked away, blinking rapidly. I hate that you're right. Jungkook softened instantly. I don't want to be right, I just want you alive. Present, here. Jimin finally met his gaze. Then stay, he said quietly, even when it gets ugly. Jungkook didn't hesitate. I already am. Later that night, as notifications exploded and debates raged beyond their walls, Jimin sat on the balcony alone, wrapped in a thin jacket, cool air biting his skin. The city stretched endlessly below him, indifferent and alive. Jungkook joined him with 2 cups of tea. Couldn't sleep, he said unnecessarily. Me neither. They stood side by side, shoulders almost touching. You know, Jungkook said after a while, today might change things forever. Jimin nodded. I know. Jungkook smiled faintly. Good, because for the first time that doesn't feel like a threat. Jimin closed his eyes, breathing in the night air. The fear was still there. The consequences still loomed. But so did something else, something steady, warm, and real. And for the first time since breaking his silence, Jimin felt ready to face whatever came next without disappearing again. Call came at dawn, slicing through the thin layer of sleep Jimin had finally managed to reach. Jungkook answered it first, voice rough. What? He listened for a moment, expression hardening, then glanced toward Jimin, who was already sitting up, heart pounding. We'll be there, Jungkook said and ended the call. Jimin didn't ask who it was. He already knew. The conference room was colder than it needed to be, air conditioning humming like a warning. Executives lined one side of the long table, faces polite and distant, the kind of calm that only came when decisions had already been made. Jimin sat across from them, Jungkook beside him, shoulders squared. We're concerned, one of them began. Your recent statements have created instability. Jimin tilted his head slightly. Instability for whom? A pause. For the brand. Jungkook let out a short laugh. You mean for the illusion? The executive's eyes narrowed. This isn't helpful. What's not helpful? Jungkook shot back. Is pretending he's a problem instead of asking why it got this bad. Jimin placed a hand on Jungkook's wrist, grounding both of them. I didn't come here to fight, he said calmly. I came here to set boundaries. Another executive leaned forward. Boundaries aren't usually dictated by talent. Jimin met his gaze, unflinching. Then maybe that's the first thing that needs to change. The air shifted. Someone cleared their throat. You've inspired reactions, the executive continued carefully. Other artists, fans, there are whispers of solidarity. That kind of movement can become dangerous. Jimin's lips pressed together. People speaking honestly about their pain isn't dangerous. Ignoring it is. Jungkook nodded. You taught us to connect with people. Don't act surprised when they listen. Silence stretched, taut as a wire. Finally, the executive sighed. We need assurance this won't escalate. Jimin stood. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. Jungkook's breath caught, but he didn't stop him. I can't promise that, Jimin said, because healing isn't quiet and neither is truth. They left without shaking hands. Outside, the sky was overcast, heavy with impending rain. Jungkook exhaled sharply. That went badly. Jimin smiled faintly. It went honestly. By afternoon, the backlash intensified. A leaked internal memo surfaced online. Anonymous quotes painted Jimin as difficult, Jungkook as reckless. Comment sections burned. Jungkook slammed his phone down. They're trying to pit us against each other. Jimin nodded. They always do. Jungkook looked at him, eyes fierce. Then say it with me, out loud. They went live that night without announcement. No stage, no script. Just the two of them sitting side by side, camera slightly tilted, raw and unmistakably real. I didn't plan to speak tonight, Jimin began. But I'm tired of watching stories get written about us instead of by us. Jungkook leaned forward. This isn't a rebellion. It's a refusal to keep pretending. Comments flooded and faster than they could read. Jimin swallowed. I'm not broken, I was overwhelmed, and I won't be shamed for admitting that. Jungkook's voice cracked. And I won't apologize for standing with him. If that's controversial, then maybe the problem isn't us. There was no dramatic ending, no perfect closing line, just silence as they ended the stream and sat there, breathing. Afterward, Jungkook laughed shakily. That's it, no taking it back now. Jimin nodded, eyes glossy but steady. I don't want to. Later, as rain finally fell against the windows, washing the city in silver streaks, they sat on the floor with their backs against the couch, drained and strangely light. You know, Jungkook said softly, whatever happens next, I don't regret this. Jimin turned to him, emotion thick in his throat. Neither do I for the first time. I feel like I'm living my life instead of surviving it. Jungkook smiled, tired but genuine. Then it was worth it. Outside, the world continued to argue, to judge, to react. Inside, two people stayed exactly where they were, present, unhidden, and finally at peace with the sound of their own voices. The morning arrived quietly, almost apologetically. Jimin woke to sunlight filtering through the curtains, soft and pale, touching his face like a question rather than a demand. For the first time in a long while, his chest didn't feel tight when he inhaled. The world hadn't ended overnight. The noise was still out there, headlines, debates, consequences, but it no longer lived inside his lungs. Jungkook was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling aimlessly without really reading. He looked up the moment Jimin stirred. You slept, Jungkook said, surprised. So did you, Jimin replied, voice rough but lighter than it had been in weeks. Jungkook smiled, small and real. Guess we finally ran out of adrenaline. They didn't rush that morning. No managers knocking, no emergency calls, just the sound of boiling water, the clink of cups, the quiet comfort of shared space. Ordinary things reclaimed. Jimin watched Jungkook move around the kitchen, humming under his breath, cheerful in that familiar way, but different now, less forced, less armor. I used to think being strong meant never letting anyone see me crack, Jimin said suddenly. Jungkook leaned against the counter, listening. But when I finally did, Jimin continued, I realized I wasn't alone on the other side of it. Jungkook's eyes softened. You never were. The fallout came as expected. Meetings, long conversations. Some doors closed, others opened unexpectedly. Messages arrived, not demands this time, but quiet thank yous, from people who felt seen, from people who had been waiting for permission to breathe. Jimin didn't read all of them. He didn't need to. What mattered was this. Sitting beside Jungkook on the couch later that evening, legs stretched out, a shared blanket pulled up between them. The city lights flickered on one by one, no longer overwhelming, just part of the view. Do you regret it? Jungkook asked, not looking at him. Jimin considered the question carefully. The fear, the pain, the uncertainty that still lingered. No, he said at last. I regret the years I spent thinking my voice was a liability. Jungkook let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like relief. His eyes shone, but this time the tears didn't fall. I'm glad you spoke, he said, even if it scared everyone. Jimin smiled, especially if it scared everyone. They laughed softly, the sound unguarded, human. Outside, the world kept moving. Inside, something had settled into place. Not perfection, not certainty, but honesty and connection, and the quiet courage to keep going without disappearing. Jimin leaned back, eyes closing, finally at peace with the sound of his own heartbeat. He had spoken, and he was still here,